Hi, Doug Couchman here of DougCouchman.com. This is part 2 of a series of videos that I'm doing on correlation and causation, which, as you know from part 1, and if you haven't watched part 1, I suggest you do so before continuing with this one. Anyway, as you know from part 1, correlation and causation is one of the big 3 flaws, the 3 flaws we really have to understand in order to do well in the LSAT. Get into law school. Now, you may be here because you're taking the LSAT, and that's great. You may also be here because you're planning on taking the MCAT. And in this video, in contrast to the last one, I'm actually going to start to touch on some issues that arise on the MCAT as well. The MCAT, of course, more science-oriented test by far than the LSAT. And when we talk about correlation, they tend to get more involved. But this still is primarily directed at the LSAT. Okay, so you recall from the last video, the big 3 flaws that we need to worry about: correlation and causation. 2 things go together, so one of them causes the other, or not. Necessary sufficient flaw, not the subject of today's video, but it's super important. And the you haven't proved you're right, so you're wrong flaw. I don't have a fancy name for that. Other flaws, certainly we can name them. We can name lots of flaws on the LSAT, but I find that worrying about specific named flaws is useful only with these 3. So correlation causation is huge on the LSAT. One of the very most common flaws and the most important to recognize. We talked last time, okay, reminder, what's correlation causation? Correlation, simple, 2 things go together. On average, or always, but it could be just on average. Therefore, conclusion, one of them causes the other. And that conclusion could be explicit, one of them causes the other, or it could be implicit. I'm going to give you advice that makes no sense unless something causes something else. Okay? Smoking is associated strongly with lung cancer, so to prevent yourself from getting lung cancer or to reduce your chances of getting lung cancer, you should stop smoking, and you should stop smoking. Seriously, cut it out. That advice makes no sense unless implicitly I'm assuming a lot of things, but one of them I'm assuming is smoking causes lung cancer. Where did I get that? Smoking goes with lung cancer. Does that follow logically? No, it does not. Is it probably true? Yeah, it's almost certainly true. And one of the reasons that I cite science so much in discussing correlation causation is this is how science is done. I keep running experiments. I do this thing and that's what happens. So doing this thing causes that to happen. That's science. Unless we can actually see a mechanism, and although some sciences are advancing to where we can, we're just left to assume, to impute causation from correlation. And it's, you know, it's kind of good. In some cases, it's really good, but it's not actually logically, provably, absolutely sound, because there are a lot of things that can go wrong, and the LSAT makes us look at this. Okay, what can go wrong with correlation? As I said last time, one of them is we just got a random correlation. The correlation is spurious. It's just random. Never the issue on the LSAT. Related to that, you don't have a big enough sample size to be sure about this. Almost never the issue on the LSAT. You have bad data, okay? It's not just, I mean, yeah, I get that you see that correlation, but your data are sloppy, okay? Merely sloppy data, badly collected data, not the issue on the LSAT ever, okay? On the other hand, biased data, and we talked about the Geico insurance problem last time. Biased data, if I'm collecting data from one sample and then I'm drawing a conclusion about a different population, often a larger population that I have reason to believe is different from the sample I was looking at for my correlation, that's a problem. And it does appear on the LSAT. Okay? Really what you watch for is, wait, okay, the data for the reasons, the premises, the evidence was for this group, and I drew a conclusion about a different group. If there's any reason to believe that those groups are different, then that's a potential problem with the correlation causation argument. Okay? Now, by the way, I didn't mention this last time, but who collects the data? Never the issue. Okay, you know, it's never a flaw. It's never, you know, I'm assuming they're unbiased or anything like that. Granted, it might be the issue in reality, and my MCAT students need to worry about blinding and double blinding. Okay, but we don't have to worry about that on the LSAT. Okay, but an actual bias in the sample, we have to worry about that. The most common issue, and by issue, I mean like what's buried in there that I need to understand in order to answer the question. The question might be, hey, which of the following would weaken this argument? Which of the following would strengthen this argument? Which of the following is the flaw in the argument? Or which of the following is an assumption that's necessary for the argument to work? And there are a lot of ways to phrase each of these things. But basically we have weaken, strengthen, assumption, and flaw, the big four of the conclusion-based arguments. And correlation causation can be the issue in any of them. The most common thing we're going to want to recognize in order to answer the problem is the possible presence of another factor, another cause, a third thing. A goes with B, so, conclusion, A causes B. Well, it's actually not A causing B, it's something else, it's C. Okay? Suppose I say that, well, Mississippi, educational results in Mississippi are worse than anywhere else in the country. Okay? So, living in Mississippi causes people to do worse on exams. Okay, well, I mean, I suppose it might, but I think I would also want to look at, well, poverty, for example, or maybe not living in Mississippi. Being born in Mississippi, it's not being born in Mississippi. It's poverty, or it's a lousy education system, or something. If you're from Mississippi, I'm sorry. You know, congratulations on getting this far. But, I mean, these are just averages. By the way, the presence of exceptions to a pattern never weakens the pattern on the LSAT. Never, 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 never. The answer chart starts with some, it's not the answer. That's a different issue. Anyway, back to correlation causation. The presence of a third factor. We talked last time about the French paradox. The French drink red wine and eat saturated fat and have more than Americans do, and have less coronary heart disease than Americans do. So, red wine causes a reduction in coronary heart disease. Or so you, in order to reduce your chances of coronary heart disease, should have a glass of wine with dinner. I mean, it doesn't sound like a bad idea, but it is a bad idea if you think that it's going to have that effect, because we now know it doesn't. And why? Well, it turned out that there were a lot of other things that might have been causing that effect. Maybe the French have other characteristics, like they have less stress, or they have a better healthcare system. Maybe also they collect their data wrong, or rather wrong. They collect their data differently from how Americans collect it, or they categorize things differently. That could cause it too. That's kind of one of those bias problems. But the presence of other factors is usually what's going on in a correlation causation argument. Today in this video, with that kind of background, I want to address another possibility, one that's considerably less common than the something else is causing it issue, but that you nevertheless absolutely have to understand, in part because it gets more complicated. And that is you're right that one of them causes the other, but you're wrong about which one is which. Okay, I'll give you some examples of how this theoretically might work, but you'd never see this problem, and then we'll get into some that you would see this problem. Every time I take my umbrella when I leave for work in the morning, it winds up raining in the afternoon. So, if I don't want it to rain, I should not take my umbrella. What do you think of that argument? You should think it's stupid. Okay? Wait a minute. So essentially, implicitly, I'm saying, wait, taking my umbrella in the morning causes it to rain in the afternoon. That's really dumb. It makes no sense. But logically, it's possible, right? I mean, maybe I'm actually doing a little rain dance and rain dances work. Logically, it's possible, but the LSAT doesn't ask these questions that logically make no sense. Sometimes you can recognize it because not only does it make no sense, but it's actually logically impossible. Suppose I say every time it's been raining all day, I take my umbrella. So if I don't want it to rain all day, I should not take my umbrella. Now here, that one doesn't work at all because the rain happened first. The rain happened and then the umbrella happens, taking the umbrella. And time doesn't go backwards, at least not, I mean, maybe this is some weird philosophical thing, okay? But time on the LSAT moves in the direction we think it moves. A can't cause B unless A happened before B. But the fact, of course, that A happened before B doesn't mean post hoc ergo propter hoc, say the Latin scholars, which we don't do, okay? So we've got, in order for cause to go backwards, we need for the time to work. Like the first thing has to happen before the second thing, or they have to be happening at the same time. That's more likely. Okay? It also has to be like, it makes some sense. Okay? It makes some sense. Let's say, a variation on this rain thing. Every time the Mudville 9 play a baseball game, it doesn't rain. Okay? It never rains when the Mudville 9 play a baseball game. Whereas, this correlation is it goes both ways. Whereas, often when the Mudville 9 don't play during the baseball season, it does rain. So, says the city councilman, if we want this drought to end, we must prevent the Mudville 9 from playing baseball. Okay, the conclusion is about advice. It's about we must do this, we have to do this, we ought to do this, we should do this. And implicit in that advice is cause. Implicit, this makes no sense, I'm assuming, apparently, that the Mudville 9 playing baseball causes it not to rain. So having them not play baseball, at least by probabilistically, allows it more to rain. We want the drought to end. We've got to prevent the baseball games. Does this make sense? It should feel wrong to you. It should feel factually wrong. And it should feel factually wrong, but wait, do you think the Mudville 9 playing baseball, the correlation was real? Why would that be? Why would it be that the Mudville 9 play baseball only on dry, sunny days? Whereas on rainy days, they don't play baseball. Maybe it's not that the Mudville 9 playing baseball causes it not to rain. It's the fact that it's not raining allows the Mudville 9 to play baseball, causes them to continue with their scheduled game. Whereas raining causes them to cancel the game or to rain it out. Okay? That's an example of correlation causation with where we could phrase the problem in such a way so that, okay, in theory it's possible, but in practice the issue is probably that at least it might go the other direction. You're right that there's a causal relationship, you're wrong about which one caused the other. But these examples, this one I just gave you, it sounds really contrived. It sounds, frankly, a little ridiculous, right? And the LSAT, I mean, some of the examples are abstract, but few of them sound ridiculous. So where are we going to see this cause goes backwards argument? Well, in contexts in which the claim is not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous to conclude maybe one thing causes the other, but maybe it's the other that causes the one. And almost always, the situation when we see this, or the subject matter, when we see this kind of issue, is medicine, okay? Not health and diet. Exercising goes with a lower pulse rate, so you should exercise in order to lower your pulse rate, okay? Drinking red wine goes with lower heart disease, so you should drink red wine in order to lower your incidence of heart disease. Those, I mean, the issue is always, something else is doing it. That's almost always on the LSAT. Something else is doing it because dietitians on the LSAT never understand other, other variables. They never correct for everything. But no, I mean something different. Not health and diet. I mean real honest to goodness medicine, like stuff that my MCAT students would be like, oh wow, that's a complicated passage. Okay? If on the LSAT, in an LSAT argument, you see the names of blood chemicals or proteins in the body or anything in the body that either you don't recognize, you're a smart, literate person, you have a decent vocabulary, but you don't know that word, or that you may know because you saw it in the news or you studied it or whatever, but a lot of people in the LSAT, you know, they won't know it. Amyloid plaques. You might know what an amyloid plaque is, okay? But you know darn well a lot of people don't. Okay, you see stuff about amyloid plaques, or you see the name of drugs and these proteins, or the name of a disease that goes with drugs or proteins or other, like, you know, chemical sounding stuff or complicated biology sounding stuff. Then the issue is probably, first of all, it's probably a correlation causation argument. And second, the issue is going to be how sure can we be that cause doesn't go backwards? Okay, so giving you examples of this is, I mean, you can tell I'm saying that they're complicated sounding. So any example is going to be at least a little complicated sounding. I'll try and give you a simple one that isn't silly. Suppose that amyloid plaques, amyloid beta plaques, are strongly associated with, says the problem, the incidence of Alzheimer's disease. People with Alzheimer's, people over the age of 75 who exhibit symptoms of Alzheimer's have been found to have considerably higher levels of amyloid plaques in their brains than people who are not exhibiting symptoms of Alzheimer's. Was that true? Actually, yes. Okay. Do you know what an amyloid plaque is? No. Let's say no. Do you need to know? No. You need to see, okay, it's a thing. It's a complicated medically thing. And it is correlated with, they found that it goes with Alzheimer's disease. We may not know exactly what Alzheimer's disease, but it sounds bad. Okay, you don't even need to know that it sounds bad. But so plaques go with disease. A new drug, has been found to reduce the presence of amyloid plaques. Now notice I just said cause there. Reduce means cause a reduction in. So, assuming adequate safety, we should is advice, we should approve this drug for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Okay. This might sound familiar if you followed the news the last few years, but I'm not talking about any particular drug. This is an issue, frankly, in just about every medical thing. There's, often with drugs, okay? Drugs and diseases. Well, wait a minute, what's the issue? I mean, the drug reduces amyloid plaques, and amyloid plaques, people with Alzheimer's, people with amyloid plaques get Alzheimer's. So, I mean, it makes sense. I want the drug. Alzheimer's Association says we want the drug. They really push Congress to push the FDA to approve the drug. I want the drug. Because, nobody wants Alzheimer's. What do we miss? Okay, so we even said cause. Cause was there. They said the drug causes a reduction in amyloid plaques. And if they say it in the reasons, in the premises, in the evidence, in whatever the stuff is that isn't the conclusion, then we're going to assume they're right. It does. Okay? All right, so the issue and the problem isn't going to be, doesn't actually reduce plaques. So what's the issue? But go back. And I said, people who exhibit symptoms of Alzheimer's have more plaques. Why? I don't know. And you can think of, at least in the abstract, there are two possibilities. Actually, there are three. Maybe the plaques are actually causing the Alzheimer's disease. So reducing the plaques would cause a reduction in Alzheimer's disease, at least probably. We could accept that on the LSAT. But there's another possibility. Maybe Alzheimer's disease is causing the plaques. shoot. Okay? Maybe there's this disease. We don't know exactly what Alzheimer's is. At least you and I don't, because we're LSAT people, not MCAT people. Maybe it's not plaques cause Alzheimer's. Maybe it's Alzheimer's cause plaques. Shoot. You see how this is? Like, unless you actually are studying medicine, you're not going to know. And even if you think you know other people don't. And they're not testing your medical knowledge. They're testing your logic here. Okay? If all they've said about Alzheimer's and plaques is they go together, they're correlated with each other, then you don't know. Maybe A causes B. Amyloid plaques causes Alzheimer's. Maybe B causes A. Alzheimer's causes amyloid plaques. Now maybe there's a third factor. There's actually, the action of Schwann cells or astrocytes or something has something to do. You haven't heard of these things, okay? But maybe it has something that actually causes both of them. Okay? But in medicine problems on the LSAT, so often the issue is the possibility, at least, that we're right that there's a causal relationship between two things. We're just wrong about which one causes which. Now notice, in this problem, I also had the drug. The drug causes a reduction in the plaques, not the issue. All right, so what do we do with this? Well, it depends on what the problem asks us. And the problem will ask us one of four things. It will almost certainly ask us to weaken it to strengthen it, ask us what the flaw is, or ask us what an assumption is. There's not the assumption. There are hundreds of them. Okay. They're not the flaw, but, it will say the most prominent flaw. The argument is flawed in that, whatever. All right, so how do we do this? I think it's easier to start, as with many conclusion-based arguments, to start by thinking about what would weaken it. Well, what would weaken this argument that we should approve this drug that reduces plaques? Now, the thing that would weaken it is that we're wrong about which way cause goes. Okay? That Alzheimer's causes the plaques. That would weaken the argument that we should, essentially we've got a drug that's supposedly going to help the disease, but it's actually just curing a symptom, not the problem. It's a common thing in drug research. Okay, and it's a common thing on the LSAT. That would weaken it. What would strengthen it? And here is where we often have strengthened problems on this kind of correlation causation, where it's a medicine thing and the issue is, does cause go backwards? And what would strengthen it is cause doesn't go backwards. Okay. How do we know that cause doesn't go backwards? Well, now maybe we'll get time in there. The plaques appear before symptoms of Alzheimer's. Does that strengthen? Does that prove the argument's right? Absolutely not. It does not. The plaques appear before symptoms of Alzheimer's. Now, maybe the underlying disease was present, but at least this suggests more strongly that the plaques were first. And if the plaques were first, then they weren't last. If the plaques came before the disease, then the disease didn't cause the plaques. Now, that doesn't mean the plaques caused the disease, but at least it takes away this possibility that you had it backwards. The other thing, it might explicitly say that plaques are not caused by Alzheimer's, or something like that. Or it might say that plaques are caused by something else. The plaques tend to be caused by viral infections. Well, if they're caused by viral infections, they're not caused by Alzheimer's disease, at least more often. So these things would tend to strengthen it. What's the assumption, a necessary assumption? Remember, a necessary assumption, it will probably use the word assumption. It will definitely use a word of necessity. The conclusion, the conclusion requires the assumption, that demands the assumption, depends on the assumption. These words of necessity. Well, it depends on the assumption that cause doesn't go backwards. Okay. So it doesn't depend on any specific assumption like the plaques came first, but it does depend on the assumption that Alzheimer's does not cause plaques. We won't as often see a necessary assumption question on when the issue is, does cause go backwards? Which of the following is a flaw? Well, the flaw is that the assumption might be wrong. Or the flaw might be that they neglect to consider this thing that would weaken it. They neglect to consider the possibility that the plaques don't cause, that the Alzheimer's causes plaques. Okay. This will often be phrased in an abstract sense, assumes without warrant that I mean, it might say that it seems without warrant that the fact that two things are correlated with each other implies that one of them caused the other. But when the issue is, what about cause being backwards? Okay, neglects the possibility that, and we'd have various ways of saying cause goes backwards, neglects the possibility that, assumes one, what am I looking for here? Chooses one of two possible explanations without rejecting the other possibility. So that's hard, right? Because two possible explanations. Alzheimer's causes plaques, plaques cause Alzheimer's. And it essentially chooses one. And usually we're going to see this as weakened questions or strengthened questions. So again, you see a problem on the LSAT logical reasoning section. And there's going to be two of them on future LSATs starting in July. There are going to be two logical reasoning sections, which there should have been and there used to be pre-pandemic. Okay, back to the way we should have had it the whole time. Logical reasoning really is the essence of the LSAT. Okay? You see this paragraph. First of all, you read the question stem. Okay, some conclusion-based argument. Weaken, strengthen, assumption, flaw. You start looking at the paragraph and you see medicine. Not just diet, not just, eating acai berries. This is medicine. Maybe you see scary medicine. You see terms that either you don't know or they're sure that other people don't know. Then you should think, Doug says it's probably going to be correlation causation, and Doug says the issue might well be that they have cause backwards. So check it. Okay, is there correlation in the body of the paragraph, the reasons, the premises, the evidence? Okay, there might, as I gave you this one, there might be some cause there too, but then we've got two things go together and they never say one causes the other, but then in the conclusion they either say one of them causes the other, or they give you advice or tell you that something is likely to happen, and that makes no sense unless the one thing causes the other, and then you think, well, is it possible, is it logically possible that I'm wrong about which one causes the other one? And if it is, then that is very likely to be the issue. And so then depending on what the question is, you go to the answers and you find it. All right, so this is, again, more complicated than just, that other thing is causing it instead type of problem. Okay? But, and luckily it doesn't appear nearly as often. Tends to be problem 16 or later. 16 to 17 is where logical reasoning problems tend to get interesting. You got medicine, and it's problem 21, and yeah, that's what it's going to be. Okay. Now, I'm telling you, this is what you're likely to see. Does that mean you have to think about explicitly how it's worded? No, of course not. Okay, you just have a general idea what you're looking for. Okay, the only time we could come up with specific answers on logical reasoning problems is where we're really confident we know exactly what we're looking for. This is not that kind. It's fact-based stuff. And fact-based stuff, the world is messy and complicated. Facts are messy. And there are thousands, maybe millions of possibilities. Do not think about the answer in great detail unless you know what it's going to be. Okay? And the only time you know what it's going to be is when a principal question, or frankly, principal question is a good example. We know exactly what we're about to see. Okay, here we don't know, but you keep in mind, okay, I'm looking for maybe cause goes backwards. All right, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful. In other videos, I'm going to talk about, one of the things I'm going to talk about is what about when the answer, it's not correlation causation, it's no correlation, so no causation. That's an interesting variation. We'll talk about that in another video. Talk about some other issues related to correlation causation. For more information, go to my website at dougcouchman.com. Email me at doug@dougcouchman.com. Yes, those are real. Leave comments, subscribe to the channel, and good luck on your test.